How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tzadi Vav, Daf 96 of Masechta BavaBasra. Friends, I don't know, what are we talking about? We're talking about stuff. We're talking about stuff? Yeah, why not? Okay, we're going to start on Daf Tzadi Hamud Beis, about 5 lines from the bottom. I think it's interesting stuff. I can't remember. Okay, we're going to start on Daf Tzadi Hamud Beis, 5 lines from the bottom. Amar Yehuda says of Yehuda, Yaina nimkar b'chonus mevarchin olav borei pri ha gofen. Okay, so it says of Yehuda that supermarket wine. So we're going to get into Be'etzim now. So Be'etzim now, Givaldik. So Be'etzim now we're going to get into this discussion of supermarket wine. We talked yesterday. It came up yesterday already, Lamaisa, right? This Indian of supermarket wine. So Be'etzim is some kind of inferior wine. It's still wine, but it's like not good. So we're going to talk about what it is. So Yehuda says of Yehuda, Yain limka b'chonus, that supermarket wine. Mevarchin olav borei pri ha gofen. Excuse me, I need to rub my nose. Oh, okay, fine. Thank you. Oh, did I just? Oops, sorry if I just scratched the microphone. So supermarket wine, you say borei pri ha gofen. Rav Chizda Amar says of Chizda gabi chamer de ikim lamali. Why would you make borei pri ha gofen and sour wine? It should be shakoni b'dvar. Meisvei, we have a kasha al apas she'ipsha. This is from Brachis, that on moldy bread, val yain she'ikrim, and on, I guess, sour wine, val tavshil she'avad tzuraso, and on a cooked dish that avad tzurasod, that like went bad. Okay. Okay. Oh my gosh, I'm like all over the place over here. All right. Where am I? Okay, so on all those things say shakon b'dvaro. So we see that on yain she'ikrim shakon b'dvaro. How could Yehuda say borei pri ha gofen? Rav Zvid says, Rav Zvid, mother of Yehuda befurtzima the mizdaben akarnisa. Oh my God! Excuse me. Okay, please. This should hopefully be the rub of all rubs. The rub to rub them all. All right, nose. Do me a favor. Hold off for a bit. Rav Zvid says of Yehuda befurtzim the mizamen akanis. Now Yehuda, of course, agrees when it comes to supermarket wine is at least drinkable, right? If you're in a bind, if you quickly need to buy it, it's okay, so you can buy supermarket wine. But then there's a shlav lower than that, which is pashit. The only people that you can't sell it in the store. You can maybe sell it to some people, some alcoholics on the street corner who will just take anything, right? So there's that. The mizdaben akanis that you could sell on the corners. Rabbi Yehuda would agree that in that case it's shakol b'dvar. But supermarket wine is still going to be borei pri ha gofen. Omer le Abai of Yosef says Abai to Rav Yosef or Rav Yehuda or Rav Chizda Mar Kiman Svir le. So Abai says to Rav Yosef. Okay, so we see machloikes between Rav Yehuda and Rav Chizda. Rav Yehuda says that on supermarket wine it is borei pri ha gofen. Rav Chizda says shakol b'dvar. So Abai asks Rabbi Rav Yosef, what's your position on the matter? Omer le. So Rav Yosef responds, Masnisa yo daino. I know a brisa de Tanya that we learn in a Brisa. Habodek es achovis lios mafish alea truma v'holech v'achar kach nimtzeis chomet chogimul yom vadim kan velech sofek. My comer. Bam param param paro para da 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 da. Okay, so say you have 50 barrels of wine. You are a wine monger, and you have 50 barrels of wine. So every time you sell a barrel of wine, instead of separating truma from that barrel of wine, you actually you designate milichatchila 1 barrel of wine, and that is going to be your truma barrel, and you'll separate from that barrel, so you'll give basically a complete barrel to a buyer, and you'll separate truma from this sort of designated barrel. So now, Givaldig. Now that only works. So basically, what happens if one day you taste the? Let's say this. So you designate one of the barrels that's going to be for truma, and you taste some of the wine in the barrel to make sure that it's still, wine. It's not vinegar, and it's good. It's Givaldig. It's mamash Givaldig. You say, okay, this barrel is going to be what I'm going to separate truma. What I'm going to use for trumas. 10 days later, I made up 10, could be 20, could be whatever, 30, whatever it is. 10 days later, let's say, he gives it another taste test, and it's already vinegar now. It's vinegar. Now it's vinegar. So now, throughout the past 10 days, he's been using this barrel for separate, to separate trumas for other barrels. Now, if it's vinegar, you can't, right? So we saw Taka the other day. It's the opinion of Rebbe that wine and vinegar are under azachin, are separate things, and therefore you can't separate truma from. You can't use truma. You can't use vinegar for truma for wine. So 10 days later, it turns out it's vinegar. Now, in the meantime, between the last time you tasted and it was gevaldig, and this time when you taste and it's schlecht. So, but in the interim, you've been using this for truma, which means that if it was already vinegar, you didn't separate truma properly. So what do we do? Okay, so Titania, from the top of Tzadi Vav Aleph. Habodek es achovis, if somebody checks a barrel, lios mafish alei truma veholech, right, so that he will be able to use this barrel for separating truma for other barrels. And 10 days later, I'm making that number, 10 days later, it turns out that it is vinegar, and the question is, at what point did it become vinegar? At what point are the trumas that he separated invalid trumas? Kol gimel yom, so for 3 days, vadai, it's certain. Mikan ve'elach safek, after that it is uncertain. My ka'amar, what does this mean? 3 days certain, the rest of the days uncertain. Machloikes Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Shua ben Levi. On Rabbi Yechanan, says Rabbi Yechanan, this is what it means. Kol gimel yomim harishon. For the first 3 days. So on day 1, you tasted, right? He tasted from the barrel, and it was mamash gevalt. It was a mamash gevalt. He very, very much enjoyed it. So on day 1, he tasted it, and it was gevaldige wine. So therefore, for the next 3 days, any trumas that he separated is definitely good truma, because it's still going to be wine for at least 3 days after the initial taste. So it is certainly wine. Mikan ve'elach, however, after that point, so from days 4 and on, suffix. At that point, we are not sure if it is still good wine or not. My time, how come? Because chamru me'iloi oker. Because if you have a barrel of wine and it's becoming vinegar, it becomes vinegar from the top. It starts from the top. Okay? It starts from the top. Which means once it becomes, meaning, so when v'hai te'ime v'lo oker, right? And on day 1, he had tasted the wine, and it was still mamash gevalt. It was very, very good wine. So at that point, it was definitely still good wine. Imtim salomar basar de te'ime oker, and if what happened was mamish immediately after he tasted that wine, it started vinegaring. So for the next 3 days, it takes 3 days to vinaigrate. To vinaigrate. That means to become vinegar. At least in Babylon Talmud it does. So it takes 3 days to vinaigrate. And during that time, so for the next 3 days, it is in this state where it smells like vinegar, but it tastes like wine. And so long as it is in this phase where it smells like vinegar but tastes like wine, it's wine. Okay? So it takes 3 days for wine to become vinegar, for wine to vinaigrate. So therefore, even if we were to say that immediately after he tasted the wine on day 1, it started to vinaigrate, it would take 3 days for that process to occur. And during that process, it's in a state where it smells like vinegar but tastes like wine, and that is still a wine state. After that point, it would be vinegar. So we know for sure that for the first 3 days, since he had initially tasted it, the first 3 days is still wine. Now, it could be that from day 4 already, it's already vinegar. But then again, we don't know that it started to vinaigrate immediately after he tasted it. It could be it only started vinaigrating on day 7, and when he tasted it on day 10, mamish just became vinegar that second. Right? So we don't know. Well, the only thing we know for certain is that for the first 3 days it's wine. After that, it is suffix. Okay? And that is this supermarket wine. Supermarket wine being wine that smells like vinegar but tastes like wine, this vinaigrating wine. So Rabbi Yehuda would be, right? So Rabbi Yochanan would be like Rabbi Yehuda, that it would still be bari pri agafen. Now, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Omar, and says, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Kol Gimel Yomim Achreinim Vadai Chometz. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says that for the last 3 days, days 8, 9, and 10, it is definitely vinegar. When he tasted it on day 10 and it was vinegar, well then on day 9 and day 8, it was also vinegar. Mikan al-Harlem, but from day 7 and below, and earlier, suffix, we are unsure if it was already vinegar. It still could have been mamish gevaldig wine. My time, because wine becomes vinegar from the bottom of the barrel. Veimer oker vilav adaite, and therefore it could be. Okay, it could be that already when he tasted it on day 1, it was already on its way. So it could be that on day 1, it was already on its way out, right? He tasted it and it tasted good, but it could be it was already starting to vinaigrate from the bottom. V'im timtzalomar me'iloi oker, and if you're going to say, right, me'iloi oker v'ha te'imei, v'loi oker, v'im timtzalomar me'iloi oker, if you're going to say that it becomes vinegar from the top, but he tasted it on day 1 and it was still fine. But dilma basar de te'ime, I guess maybe even if you want to say me'iloi oker, that it becomes it starts to vinaigrate from the top, and he tasted it and it was still givaldig. But dilma basar te'ime, but maybe immediately after he tasted it, oker, it started to vinaigrate. Okay. So have a reiche chala v'taime chamra. So even, right, so if okay, so he tasted it, okay, so at the time that he tasted the wine on day 1, so either it could have already been vinaigrating and he just didn't taste it because it vinaigrates from the bottom. Alternatively, it could be that when he tasted it, right, it was mamish good, but immediately afterwards it started vinaigrating. Which means that then, while it's vinaigrating, it's in this state where it smells like vinegar but tastes like wine. Where am I? It smells like vinegar but tastes like wine. And when it smells like vinegar but tastes like wine, chala, it is vinegar. So therefore, the big difference between Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is this, basically, yain nimkar b'chanus, this supermarket wine, this wine that is in a state of vinaigrating. Rabbi Yochanan says that vinaigrating wine is still wine. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says vinegrating wine is not wine. And therefore, according to Rabbi Shua ben Levi, vinegrating wine is not wine. On day 10, he tastes it and it's vinegar. It's mamish vinegar. Which means that Memele, for the previous 3 days, at the very most, it was vinegrating. Right? I mean, it's possible that on day 7 it was still good wine, but definitely on day 8, 9, and 10 it was already vinegrating. And vinegrating wine is not wine according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. So definitely for the last 3 days, it was not wine. That's for sure. The shaila is before that. What about for the first 7 days? Right? So it could be that already on day 1, immediately after he tasted it, it already started vinegrating, or maybe even when he tasted it, it was already vinegrating. Right? So therefore, from day 1, we simply don't know. We know that the last 3 days, according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, it is not wine because it was already vinegrating. That's for sure. The first 7 days, we don't know. Maybe it was still good wine. Maybe it was already vinegrating. Therefore, it's a suffix. Okay, so according to Rabbi Yechanan, vinegrating wine is still wine, and therefore when he tastes it on day 1 and it's mamish gaval, so for sure the first 3 days are still wine. After that, we don't know. According to Rabbi Shua ben Levi, it's fakert. Vinegrating wine is not wine, and therefore when he tastes it on day 10 and it's vinegar, we know that the previous 3 days were for sure not wine as well. Before that, it's a suffix. Okay, fine. So the Southerners taught named Rabbi Shua ben Levi that actually Rabbi Shua ben Levi agrees with Rabbi Yochanan that vinegrating wine is considered wine, and he says Rishonim Vadai, the first 3 days are certainly wine. Achronim Vadai Yain, Achronim Vadai Chametz. The first 3 days are definitely wine. The last 3 days are definitely vinegar. And so im suffix, the other days would be a suffix. So in our example, days 1, 2, 3 would be wine. Days 8, 9, 10 would be vinegar. Days 4, 5, 6, and 7 would be a suffix. Hagufa kasha, this is inherently contradictory. On the one hand, you're saying that the first 3 days are certainly wine, which means that vinegrating wine is still considered wine. But then you're saying that the last 3 days are definitely vinegar, which means that vinegrating wine is vinegar. How could it be both? So we said that according to the Southerners, Rabbi Shua ben Levi actually agreed with Rabbi Yochanan that vinegrating wine is wine, which explains why the first 3 days would be considered for sure wine. Okay, then why are we saying that the last 3 days are for sure vinegar? Because it was mamish vinegar. It was the vinegar of all vinegars. It was vinegary vinegar. And therefore, when vinegar is so vinegary, then for sure the 3 days before that, it was also at least regular level vinegar. So that's why. So you tasted it on day 1, and it was mamish gaval, which means the next 3 days is also considered wine. We tasted on day 10, it was mamish, the vinegarist of all vinegars, which means that the 3 days before that, it was also vinegary. The ilav, the okr tlasa yome loav mishtika chola siftika. Right? If not for the fact that already 3 days prior was already regular vinegar, you wouldn't get to such vinegary vinegar, that he tasted on day 10. So Kaman Poshat Lay. So now, okay, so who does? So back to the question, right? So Abaye asked Rav Yosef, what is your opinion on all of this? Is Yain Shebechonus, is supermarket wine Ber Gofen or Shackle? Is it like, who are the two opinions? Rav Yehuda or Rav Chizda? So, right, and therefore, so Rav Yosef says, well, I have a brisa. Okay, so Rav Yochanan says it's wine. Rav Shua ben Levi says it is vinegar. So, Kiman Pashat Le Pligi Bar Rav Mori Rav Zvid Machlekes of Mori Rav Zvid Chad Omar Rav Yechanan v'Chad Omar Rav Yeshua ben Levi. One opinion is that Rav Yosef holds like Rav Yochanan that it's wine. The other opinion is that it's like Rav Yeshua ben Levi that it is vinegar. Itmar, we said Amocher Chavis Yain LaChaver ve'Echmitza. If Shimon sells a barrel of wine to Reuven and it becomes vinegar, so for the first 3 days, it is Shimon the seller's fault, because if it turns vinegar in the first 3 days, it means that he sold him wine that was already vinegrating. Is that the word? Dennis, once we established in Babylon Talmud that we're going to use a certain word, so then Dennis, you become the authority on that word, on if I'm using it right. So was the word vinaigrating? I think it was, right? Dennis? It's the official Babylon Talmud word for when something is vinaigrating. So Amar Rav Kogima Yom Rishon B'Shuz Moche. Shimon's responsible because Memele, if it became vinegar in the first 3 days, he sold him something that was already vinaigrating, and therefore he's going to be responsible for it. But after 3 days, B'Shuz Lokeach. So then it is Ruvain's responsibility. It's Ruvain. Ruvain's got to deal with it after that because it could be that Shimon sold him a barrel that was a perfectly good wine. Shmuel says Shmuel Chamra Akisva Demari Shaver. Shmuel says that even if it's within the first 3 days, Shimon is irresponsible for it. Is not responsible for it. Because if wine goes bad, it's on the buyer's shoulders because he has sinned. Rav Yosef Uvda Kavasi de Rav. Rav Yosef paskind like Rav that it is Shimon's responsibility. B'shichro when it comes to beer, v'chavasi de Shmuel b'chamra, and like Shmuel when it comes to wine, v'chsa kavasi de Shmuel, and the halacha is like Shmuel. What time? Let me see. What's this? Yeah. Okay, let's stop here. Tomorrow we'll do a little bit more. I guess a daf and half, but I don't think tomorrow's going to be so long either. So, So we talked about some today about this supermarket wine. What exactly is it? It's like vinaigrating wine. And we saw machlokes between Rav Yehuda and Rav Chizda. Rav Yehuda says you say by priagofen on it, and Rav Chizda says you say shakol nibidvar. We saw that this was also a machlokes between Rav Yochanan and Rav Shua ben Levi about is vinaigrating wine considered wine, or is it considered right? Meaning like Rav Yochanan says, or is it considered vinegar like Rav Shua ben Levi says? Peace out.